Hello, and welcome back to The Collector's Corner, the podcast that demystifies art collecting with me, Antonia Fiersanti. Today, there's no collector interview. I want to tell you about the time I tried to buy an artwork and I made what I thought was a pretty reasonable offer, but I was met with complete, total silence. No counteroffer, no thanks, but no thanks, just nothing. So my first reaction was, okay, did I do something wrong? Did I accidentally offend someone? Is there a rule I didn't know about? Spoiler alert, yes, there kind of is a rule. And of course, I didn't know about it. So this episode is about pricing, it's about payment, and some of the invisible rules of the art market. So let's get into it. Here's what happened. I came across an artist whose work I just loved. And there was one piece in particular I just couldn't get out of my head. I kept thinking about it, going back to it physically in the gallery, standing in front of it. It just really had lodged itself in my brain and it just wouldn't go away. It was really that feeling. Eventually, I reached out to the gallery and I spoke with them at length about the artist, about the work and their practice. And they were super friendly and helpful. They sent me all the details, the documentation, including the pricing. They really took me seriously, which was amazing. And then came the number. And quite frankly, at the time, that number was completely aspirational for me. The gallery did offer a standard collector discount, 10 or 15%, and it was much appreciated, but it just was out of reach for me still. So throughout this whole back and forth with the gallery, I was also talking to my friends about it. And one friend in particular, who's been collecting a lot longer than me, suggested to make a cash offer. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean by that because it does sound a lot more dramatic than what it actually is. I obviously don't mean a briefcase of banknotes. I mean a direct, immediate lump sum payment. Like no installments, no back and forth, just take the money now, basically. And in my head, that felt like a good faith gesture. It removes friction, it's clean, it's decisive, it's easy. So I put that forward. Nothing. Not a no, not a yes, not even, well, think about it. The gallery just, it moved on. And eventually I did too, right? I was a bit confused, a bit baffled, and just kind of wondering what had just happened. And it took me a while to understand what was actually going on. I looked into it, and the more I learned, the more I realized I'd just been thinking about the whole thing completely the wrong way because I was thinking about it as a transaction. The price is shared, there's a discount, and I take the art home. But that is not what a gallery does, at least not really, and especially not one that's actively managing a living artist's career. A gallery like that is playing a much longer game. They're not just selling work, they are building a market. They're protecting a trajectory. And every sale they make is part of that story that they're building. So every discount, also, especially an informal one, an unusual one, becomes a data point in that story. It feeds into the bigger question of what this artist's work is worth. And that question, it matters to collectors, yes, of course, but it also matters to institutions, to curators, to all the people who might at some point give this artist an exhibition, a show, be it in 5, 10, or 15 years. So when I came in as an early stage collector with my little cash offer, I was, without realizing it, asking the gallery to introduce a new variable into a system that it is their job to keep stable. And there's something else that I hadn't thought about at all, which is the regulatory sides. So, galleries that operate in the EU, and this is actually relevant for anyone collecting here in Europe. I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but in Europe, they're subject to AML regulations, so anti money laundering regulations. So cash transactions, they are awkward from an admin point of view, and they also create compliance obligations with, documentation requirements, potential audit risk. They make the gallery's life substantially more complicated. And that is true regardless of how legitimate or good or straightforward your intentions are to begin with. None of this is sinister, right? I wasn't doing anything wrong. But from the gallery's perspective, I was just proposing something that it just was too high a cost for them from that point of view. And what I find genuinely interesting about all of this is that nobody explained it. When the gallery didn't respond, I first experienced it like a snub, like it felt a little bit personal. But I've actually come to understand that silence often isn't personal in this context and in this world more broadly. It's structural, right? It's a boundary that's being drawn without a whole conversation. And I get why. Galleries are small. They're often running on tight teams, tight resources. They can't just brief every new inquirer that walks through the door on the inner workings of the art market. There's kind of an assumption almost, a default assumption that's baked into the whole system, which is that if you're seriously engaging with this world, well, then you already know how it works. The thing is, none of us started out knowing, and very few people know that they should find out in the first place. So that silence when you're new, it can really feel like a door closing rather than a line being held in the context of a system. But what did I actually take away from all of this? The biggest shift, I think, was realizing that the art market is not a shop. When you engage with a gallery, you're stepping into a relationship with an ecosystem. So the dealers, the artists, the institutions, other collectors, they're all connected. And the more I've accepted that, the more, maybe not seamlessly, but maybe gracefully, I've been able to move within it. The second thing is keep asking questions. It's not embarrassing. I spend a lot of energy performing confidence that I just didn't really have. And what I'm learning from the collectors that I meet and I interview is that they stay curious. They don't pretend to already know everything. Asking how a gallery typically handles pricing conversations if you don't already know is very legitimate and is actually respectful of the gallery's time too. And the final thing, silence is information. If a gallery doesn't engage with something you've put forward, that is data. It doesn't mean you've burned a bridge. It usually just means the terms didn't work for reasons that probably have nothing to do with you as a person. But the most significant thing that I now understand is this idea of the artist as the invisible third party in every transaction. When I was negotiating with the gallery, I thought I was negotiating with the gallery. What I didn't fully appreciate, though, is that the artist is structurally present in that conversation too. Where the artwork goes, what it sells for, the context around it, all of that feeds back into how the artist is perceived and valued. And that's a lot of weight for just a pricing conversation, but it also makes the whole thing feel a lot more significant than just a purchase. So, yeah, so I guess every industry, the art world included, has its own rules. Some are written, but most are not. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem. You know, every world has its cultures, its rhythm, its unspoken ways. What I do think, however, is transparency would really open the door to more people. And that's why I talk about this here. I'm not being cynical. I genuinely love this world. But what I'm saying is here's what I don't know, here's what I learned, and maybe it's useful to you too. So if any of this resonates, or if you've had your own moment of realizing the rules were different from what you assumed, I would love to hear about it. You can find me on Instagram at Collectors Corner or on the podcast website, collectorscornerpodcast.com. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.